surrounding states aren't signatories to the ICC. In order for the ICJ to make a ruling on something, you've got to submit yourself to the authority of the ICJ and say they even can. So I mean, like, to say that like international law is clear here, like people have opinions, sure, but like all of this is incredibly murky. Like there are some readings of international law that would say technically the only people that own any land here is an emerging state from a conflict in which Israel was the only emerging state post 48. So there's an argument being made that like Israel owns all the land technically. So I mean, like to say international law is clear here is
anybody can say whatever they want. That is true. However, the consensus is the International Court of Justice, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, and every major human rights organization in the world. If you want to take all of those and say their opinion matters as much as whatever somebody sitting in their basement and spouting about what legality means, you can do that. But I think we are pretty damn clear about the fact that international law, UN Resolution 242 that came immediately after Israel took over the West Bank, said the acquisition of territory by war is illegal under international law. That's what the resolution said, and said based on that, Israel is obligated to withdraw from the occupied territories. Israel did not want to withdraw from the occupied territories. There was a thing there about how first you need reciprocation of Palestinians recognizing Israel. That came at the beginning of the so-called peace process. So the Palestinians fulfilled the first half of that, if you want to insist on that being a condition, and Israel responded by expanding its occupation. And so the International Court of Justice in 2004 weighed in on Israel building a wall throughout the West Bank. And they said, frankly, their explanation for building that wall, they're building it within occupied territories. They're building it to protect illegal settlements that are built on top of Palestinian land. All of that is illegal. And so that wall is also illegal. So this is really straightforward. And I think that we do the audience a disservice by pretending that there's a lot of kind of murky, this talk of disputed territories in the Palestinian territories, I think, is extremely unhelpful, because the dispute is between Israel on the one hand and the rest of the world on the other. There's been a short exception to that, which is when Trump came into office, he joined Israel into declaring that the occupation and the settlements are not illegal. But again, I would not want to be on the side of Trump and Netanyahu. I would rather be on the side of the entire international human rights consensus and international law consensus on this, which is that Israel's occupation and settlements and wall in the West Bank are absolutely and categorically illegal. I would like to touch on a couple of...
I mean, like, again, like the legality question here, first of all, when we're citing like human rights organizations or UN General Assembly, like all the UN General Assembly resolutions are non-binding. When you look at like a resolution like 242, it doesn't even really make sense. And I like the advisory opinions or opinions given by like UN General Assembly bodies just doesn't really mean much. And again, like the legality, like the opinions of the ICJ that's being asked to give an opinion on something where neither territory is actually submitting themselves to the jurisdiction or rulings of the ICJ. In terms of insofar as international law goes, it's kind of pointless. I mean, they're nice arguments and we can use them, I guess, if we feel like they're bolstering something, but they don't really address any of the issues on the ground and they don't really get us any closer to an actual peace process. I think even you would agree that screaming at Israel over and over again, hey, there are some people that think that what you're doing is illegal, doesn't really get us anywhere. It's not.
No. I think when one country steals land from another people against international law and is ethnically cleansing them in slow motion, pushing them out of their homes, driving them out of their home to the condemnation of every human rights organization in the world, I think screaming at them about that is the right thing to do. And sure, it comes down to the governments that are supplying and enabling that. The United States government should not be sending weapons to a country that is engaging in human rights violations and land theft on this scale. That's the fundamental reality. Look,
when we say, okay, so let's we can go into this as deeply as you'd want to. I'd love to. When we say steals land from another people, when we say Israel steals land from another people, what does that mean?
It means Palestinians have Israeli soldiers. I can send you videos if you have not seen them.
Okay.
Who knock on their doors in a place like occupied East Jerusalem, which again, under international law, which you don't seem to care so much about. I mean, by the way, if you want to go down that line of dismissing international law, then by all means, Russia invading Ukraine is just fine. And if China wants to take over part of the United States, that's also okay. Who's to say it's all disputed? I don't think that's a useful frame of reference.
Well, I don't think China invading countries or Russia invading countries is a lot different, because you have internationally recognized sovereign states with borders that even those countries had recognized that are being invaded. That's a lot different than whatever the situation is right now in Israel and Palestine. When we say Israel stealing land from people, who did Israel steal land from? When you pointed back to Resolution 242, what is that referring to? Who did they steal land from?
Resolution 242 says that Israel taking over the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem violates international law because those are not part of Israel. At the time, the West Bank was under Jordanian control and Gaza was under Egyptian control.
Wait, no. They weren't under, they were part of those countries, right? They weren't. They didn't belong to Palestine. Of course, Jordan literally made. Why do you think Jordan today is 2/3 Palestinians? They literally gave citizenship and made citizens every single person living in the West Bank.
No. You're confused. Jordan was not part of Jordan officially. Jordan right now, by the way. Well, Jordan is not. Yeah, the West Bank is not part of Jordan. So when Israel was founded in 1948, they took over 78% of historic Palestine. The parts they did not take over were the West Bank and Gaza, and that's when those areas fell under Jordanian control and Egyptian control.
Correct. Jordan annexed the West Bank in 1950. They literally annexed it. They gave citizenship. Yes, literally. They literally did. It was, yes. That's why it was called... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. The impression that I'm under right now is that you want to debate semantics about all of this and refusing, again, insisting on getting into a level of weeds here that is designed specifically to miss the overarching picture.
Okay.
The overarching picture, again, for simplicity's sake, the entire world agrees that the West Bank is not part of Israel and Israel is obligated to withdraw from it. Israel entered a peace process in 1993 that is premised on withdrawing from the occupied territories.
No, they're not.
They did the opposite.
The Oslo Accords were not premised on that. They were the Oslo Accords. No, they weren't.
They were premised on the idea of creating a Palestinian state within 5 years in the occupied territory.
There were no concrete resolutions set on the Oslo Accords. That's why in 5 years they needed to revisit to do an actual peace process. The Oslo Accords did not make any actual commitments. Also, it's very annoying that people accuse me of not knowing anything about this topic, but then I understand when you're debating things like this, you don't know anything about the topic, and that's why you get upset when you talk about like getting in the weeds. Even that quote that you gave earlier from the Israeli foreign minister about how like I wouldn't have accepted the deal if I was a Palestinian at the time. That's not what he said. That's not what that quote says. And if you actually go to the book and you actually read the passage where he talks about it, what he said was that conditions were not right at the time for Palestinians to feel like they could accept that deal. But he was talking about the conditions that existed throughout the country, not that it was a bad deal. Universally, every other person in the Arab world, the Egyptian leadership, Saudi foreign ambassador said that these deals were amazing, that what was coming after Camp David, what was being negotiated at the Tablet Summit, these were unbelievable deals, that Arafat went into these things expecting 91% of the land, and by the end, with land swaps, he was getting 95 to 97% of the original land that the Palestinians had. The idea that these were horrible deals that were being put before them is not true. And the idea that the Oslo Accords were some permanently negotiated peace status is also not true. That's why there was going to be another meeting in 5 years, ideally, to figure out what the permanent arrangements would be. I don't agree that anybody's getting lost in the weeds. I think it's really important to know the specifics.
No, I'm catching on to your style about this. I think you're less interested in the actual topic and more interested in winning an arguments based on kind of like silly and manufactured points. It's quite transparently what is happening here.
Wait, what is, don't you think it's important to understand like what Jordan's goal was when they invaded the West Bank, or what Egypt was doing when they invaded the Gaza Strip, rather than just screaming apartheid over and over again?
I think it's important to engage in good faith and to know what you're talking about and to not say things that you don't understand. I've watched that debate with Israel's foreign minister on more than one occasion. What he was saying is that the deal that was offered to Palestinians at the end of Camp David was a bad deal, and if he were Palestinian, he would not have accepted it. And
that's literally not what he said. If you watch the debate, and I watched that debate, it was literally hosted on Democracy Now!, and he's quoting his own book. And if you go back and read the book instead of just watching a YouTube video, you'll see the context of what was given. And what was given was that
we'll make that available. I'm glad you're saying that. I think we're going to be able to clip this up. I'm going to clip up that part of the debate. We'll put it up there with the quotes of the book, which I have sitting on my shelf. I'm happy to do all of this.
Okay. I hope they're your quotes and not quotes from a Finkelstein book about what the interview was.
No, don't worry. It'll be a clip of Shlomo Ben Ami speaking in his own words. I'm happy to put that together.
If you want the war to stop, how about just have Hamas leave? But what if you leave the hostages?
Or Israel could just stop bombing Gaza.
Why would Israel stop attacking an enemy that committed the largest terror attack per capita in the history of the entire country?
It's a ridiculous double standard.
Wait, hold on. You think it's reasonable to tell Israel, hey, Hamas, I know that you guys did a little bit of a large terrorism against us, and have been, by the way, which is a violation of international law, indiscriminately launching rockets for decades from this law, and every single one of those is a violation of international law because those are by definition indiscriminate, which by definition fail the distinction principle that is essential to law of armed conflict, one of the three prongs. So wait. So
I can't finish a single sentence. He keeps trying to cut me off.
Israel needs to allow Hamas to stay there, who's been breaking international law of armed conflict for 20 years.
As opposed to Hamas allowing the Israeli government to stay there when they're breaking international law for even longer than that.
And I want to put a fine point on that.
Seriously,
no response. There's never the whataboutisms, the yapping.
Honestly, I want to get an answer to that. Why is it that you think that the Israeli government, having committed all the atrocities that they
because
committed,
the Israeli government is a democracy that can be reasoned with. Their neighbors have reasoned with them. People have signed peace agreements. People have reached agreements with them. The Palestinians have not. And there's a reason, by the way, which you will never recognize, why all of the surrounding Arab states have abandoned Palestinians too, because their history has been one of violence. That first they've been encouraged by the surrounding nations and used by them, and then now they've been abandoned once the other nations have used them
That's
up.
a racist, anti-Palestinian
Racist? What happened in the 70s? Why did the Palestinians get kicked out of Jordan in the 70s? Why did the Palestinians assassinate the Jordanian king in 52 in Jerusalem? Why did the Palestinians get kicked out of Lebanon? Why does Egypt want to work with the Palestinians?
Do you believe he's a racist?
Why? Oh, they don't hate. He has nothing. He has nothing. We should have. I just want to slow down and I want you to answer every single one of these questions. Like, what is the format? Maybe the only way to do it is with a host. I want you to tell me what happened in Jordan in 1970. I want you to tell me why the Jordanian king was assassinated in Jerusalem and by who and why. I want you to tell me what happened in southern Lebanon. I want you to tell me why Arafat was exiled from even Palestine. I want you to tell me, I want to hear every single one of these explained, and then you can tell me if I'm being racist. I just want an answer to these, but I can't. I just have to I got to yap through it, and then I get cut off, and then we don't even.
Racist, Omar.
Yes.
When he talks about Palestinians, nobody likes them and nobody wants them and nobody whatever. Yes, absolutely, that's a racist description.
Why do they?
I don't like. Can I be clear? This distinction between there's a category of people who are racist, and a category of people who are not. I think that's a simplistic thing.
Right. Why didn't you? Why did Egypt abandon them in their peace talks from 73 to 79? Why didn't What's the answer? I'm curious. What does he think the answer is? Are all the Arabs racist against Palestinians as well?
He just described is a racist stereotype. There's absolutely no question about it.
I
don't want to get into who he
is.
is.
To a lot of people that are pro-Palestinian. I understand the history is traumatizing.
If you don't understand that the Egyptian dictatorship is collaborating with Israel to suppress anything that is Muslim Brotherhood affiliated, and that's why the reason they're collaborating against Gaza.
Was Nasser collaborating with the Israeli government when they locked all the Gazans in the Gaza Strip and didn't let any of them leave?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, you do.
Does he have no? Why won't you engage with this? And then he pivots to a personal attack. Why would he not engage with this at all?
The government when they locked all the Gazans in the Gaza Strip and didn't let any of them leave?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, you do this thing constantly where you bring up random anecdotes that are completely irrelevant to anything that what I'm
It's
doing.
not random at all.
I'm sorry. The reason why that wasn't random is because you applied today that the dictatorship in Egypt, first of all, you said dictatorship, very loaded. Yes, Egypt's had a history of dictatorships. You're implying that they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way.
Why can't I finish my sentence? Why do you keep cutting me off?
Yes, Egypt's had a history of dictatorships. You're implying that they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way. You're acting like they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way. And even from 48 to 67, when Egypt had control of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians were still locked in the Gaza Strip.
Let's be clear about
Just kidding. It wasn't random.
something. All right. Let me be clear about something. Right now, this rhetoric, I'm going to let it go for now. The idea is looking at all the surrounding Arab governments who are collaborating with Israel. It's a sign that they hate Palestinians. When you do opinion polling in any of these countries, all of them, including in Saudi Arabia, the overwhelming majority of the population wants to cut off any talk. They want to isolate Israel diplomatically. They don't want to deal with them. The people of the region absolutely oppose what Israel is doing to Palestinians. And the fact that you can cite a handful of governments in the surrounding area who all effectively belong to the U.S. orbit and operate under and get tremendous privilege and financial privilege and security privilege for collaborating with the United States, and to try to paint that as some sort of validation that they have anti-Palestinian sentiment, I think is completely ridiculous and ignorant of the dynamics that actually exist in the region.
Was this an example when Crystal said that he did a good job pointing out the tactics Destiny was trying to? Yeah, tactics. Yeah, history and fact are it's like kryptonite to a lefty. Anytime you start talking I learned that I think 3 or 4 years ago, even before I was on Vyvanse, that any single time a lefty says you need to read history, what they really mean is, I know that you haven't read the history, because if you had, you would be hardcore calling me out on this particular point. Because these motherfuckers hate history. They hate it. History is kryptonite to these motherfuckers. These guys live in tweets.
A region that I grew up in, by the way. What you have, I grew up in Kuwait, Jordan, Yemen, Oman, and the United Arab.
The fact that you grew up in Kuwait? In what year? Kuwait? Hold up.
Emirates, and I visited Palestine on multiple occasions.
Gotcha. Wait, you grew up in Kuwait in what years? Was that when Arafat was supporting Saddam Hussein?
I was born in Kuwait in 1982, and I lived there until that war. Okay. And yes, when Arafat made statements in support of Saddam Hussein, that became the reason why many...
Yep, that's why your family got kicked out, and they were never allowed back, because the Palestinian leader supported Saddam Hussein. Oh, yikes. Yikes, fam.
Palestinians could not go back to Kuwait.
Yeah, which was a really big deal too, which is also funny because those Oslo Accords, we point to Israel not being a good partner for peace. The only reason why those Oslo Accords were so horrible is because Arafat was desperately looking for a way back into Palestinian popularity after supporting Saddam Hussein when he expelled.
Yep, when your family got kicked out, that was why those Oslo Accord negotiations were bad.
Oslo, yes, and you know what was also happening, and the reason why Oslo happened is because while Arafat was looking for a way to get validation as the leader of Palestinians and come back, Israel was dealing with the fact that there's a Palestinian uprising, the first Intifada, overwhelmingly non-violent, in which Palestinians were doing civil disobedience, sometimes throwing rocks at soldiers, and Israel was brutalizing them for year after year. After they killed so many of them that the Israeli officials started being concerned about the optics of it. So they said, don't kill them, beat them up and break their arms instead. And what you ended up with...
I'm so curious. I'm so much more...
And what you ended up with... Allow me to finish. You have to let me finish my thought every now and then.
Yeah.
I like how when I try to get in here, he actually shuts me down. Are you serious? I get interrupted so many times in this debate. He's like, hold on, you gotta let him finish. I was captivated by this guy talking. Seriously?
I'm so curious.
And what you
Hold on,
ended up
wait,
with,
I'm so much more
and what you ended up with. Allow me to
hold on
finish. You have to let me finish my thought every now and then.
Yeah.
And what you ended up with.
every now and then.
I understand. We get
They
it.
started beating up Palestinian protesters and seeing them, brutalizing them, and breaking.
And they never even have like real points to bring up. We're not even having a debate, right? It's like, hey, how about this? Fact. And they're like, so what about the time when Israel shoots off the legs of small children and then the hospital doctors look at them from the West and they say, oh my God, there are children with sniper bullets. And you're like, okay, well, what about this? Like, fact. And then in Lebanon, they wrote in the diary, we need to stop bombing because there's so much death. Okay, well, what about like, fact. Israeli soldiers bomb houses with the where's your daddy protocol to whole families at night. Like, okay.
their bones on video, and that ended up being an even bigger disaster for Israel. And they did not know what to do with that civil uprising of people who wanted to be free from occupation. And so they struck a deal with Arafat and brought him in to suppress the Intifada on the fake and false promise that they might grant Palestinians a state. Arafat fell for it, and it was all a sham made
Arafat fell for it.
to suck the energy out of a genuine Palestinian uprising for freedom and to turn it into the fraudulent Oslo process in which Israel had cover to expand more and more settlements and entrench the occupation under the pretense of peace. That's the history of what happened.
So what could Israel have done after October 7th that would have been, and I don't want to lump you into this camp. Some people said it's about proportionality. What could Israel have done after October 7th that would have either been proportional or given some of the legitimate points that Stephen made about a densely populated area where you have a military and a civilian population crowded into hospitals, et cetera? What could Israel have done? What should they have done after October 7th that would have been a just response?
And I promise I'll address that directly, but just on the context that you just described before that, you have a situation in which it's impossible to have a situation in which Hamas is fighting not in civilian areas. I mean, when you talk about the difference in power, one side has a full-fledged military, has air force, has tanks. Hamas can't just go out in the field and confront them directly.
They have to wear civilian garb. They have to fight from hospitals. That's just a
Thank you.
complete total lie.
You'd have to let me finish my sentence every now and then, Stephen. Seriously.
Yeah, you have to, bro. You just cut. Oh my God.
Try, in the words of Norman Finkelstein, try to have the self-possession to just listen a little bit more.
And in the style of Norman Finkelstein, be wrong about everything.
Yeah, great. You have a situation in which the balance
Thank you, Emily. I needed that recharge.
of power makes it so that
Finkelstein, be wrong about everything.
Yeah, great. You have a situation in which the balance of power makes it so that those militants have to effectively use guerrilla tactics, and guerrilla tactics involve hiding in civilian areas. That's how that actually that happens. And if you're really upset about that and you think that that's a real problem, by all means, arm Hamas the way you arm Israel, and then they can have military on military war, and we can spare the Palestinian civilians if you think that's really what's the underlying motivation. But of course, nobody would ever consider that. We only arm the criminals on one side with massive armaments. Now, on the question of what Israel should have done, there's two separate questions that often get conflated. There's the question of, is it a just war to begin with? And then there's the question of proportion. And you can imagine if people in Gaza were free and Israel was not controlling their lives and deciding how much food they get to eat and whether they can go and come back, and then some kind of attack happened, you might expect some kind of Israeli retaliation. And then the only conversation would be about proportionality. Are they doing it in a way that is defensible? And what they're currently doing is obviously not defensible, to be devastating the civilian population in order to thin that population, by the words of Israel's leader right now.
There's no source of that quote, by the way, which is it comes from the red line.
It comes from Israeli press reporting on internal strategic conversations.
Which has never been
So
substantiated.
yes, Israeli media makes things up.
When the population has always had a calorie surplus.
Yeah, even the diet part.
Calorie surplus. They literally have. That's why when the famine started, when all the people were moved, I believe it was UNRWA that made the statement that this is a region that has never experienced hunger before.
That's what's so
He laughs at my statements, but they're factually 100% correct. Why is he allowed to laugh at me like that? And they're wrong. He's wrong. You can't laugh at me, sir. You are incorrect.
That's also why Finkelstein got mad, because if you try to say, really, wait, these people are starving? By what metric? You can't find
that's what's so infuriating, Stephen, is that you want to start counting calories.
And then he does this. He always does this every time I bring up a fact. That's what's so infuriating. How much of a meanie you are. It's so infuriating how much of a mean guy you are. You're so mean.
I appreciate that, Destiny.
All right, bye. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.